You are listening to Collider Afterthoughts on the Collider Movie Talk feed. I'm Ryan Snelling. What's up? Jaye Williams. How you doing, man?
That's me, Jaye Williams. We're here. The people that you know and love. Been called company shills.
Right.
Been called shit talkers.
Right.
I mean, we're sharing a home now with these movie talk people. I'm just trying to get Mark Ellis to pick up his Panera iced tea cups. Just clean up after yourself, Mark. Jesus.
We have a lot to discuss today. This is sort of like this is a pilot for Afterthoughts. We've been doing this kind of thing for a while now, you and I together. We've been doing it for about a year. I've been doing it for a couple of years. So I'm considering this the pilot, the premiere, because a lot of you guys might not have any idea who we are, and that scares me. It excites me. But we're going to basically cover all of our bases here today. Jay, we hate doing this, though. Like, how much do we hate? How much do we despise explaining to people what we do on
I don't
Afterthoughts?
like talking to anybody about this stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, just figure it out. Just go back. You know what? I love everything we've done in the past, but I don't like living in the past.
I know you don't.
I'm ready to look forward and move forward. I don't want to treat our audience like they're stupid, but we kind of just need to break new ground.
That's not what I'm getting at. I'm talking about how much do we hate, because publicly or with our family and friends, whenever we describe what we're doing, the name of the show has changed, but it's still kind of the same kind of conversation that we hate. So
I had a conversation with my boss at my day job about podcasting, and I hated every second of it.
It sucks.
You don't know what it is. Don't even act like it.
The biggest problem is that not only do I have to explain, I podcast, I do an after show, I talk about other people's content.
It's a show about a show.
Wait, no. It's not a show. Well, it's a show about a company.
Kind of is.
It's a show about a company, Jay.
It's okay. It's all good. No, listen, here's the thing. I've had to be more patient than I've ever had to be, and it's kind of a nice, refreshing thing, I guess. And I know this is going to shock you, like refreshing.
You've had to be patient.
So, like, with the launching of this podcast feed, there's been a lot of people who have been kind of confused about it. Pushing iTunes. Why don't you use iTunes?
Yeah.
Android isn't Apple. Like, I get it all. I did Snap, though, the other day in Christian's carpool. I just said, just Google it. Just look it up.
Right. And it's probably, I think we're going to confuse people. The people that have subscribed to Movie Talk. What is this thing?
I like that Christian's just now like, just ask Ryan and Jaye. they'll tell you.
Yeah, so even though I hate doing this, the short version is, we're here to talk about Collider. We're here to provide a fan's perspective into this company, their content, what it's like to be a fan. I think we're a voice of the fans. We're the voice of reasonable fans, I think.
There's a time throughout the week where I sort of just run through everything that's happened, and I kind of just pick up the highlights, and we're going to talk about a lot of that, some things that you might have missed, but we're going to dive really deep, I think, into the ins and outs, some of the business practices, and how we sort of foresee things going, because, listen, this whole podcast feed, this is all our idea.
Network, not the feed, the network.
Everything in general. In fact, most things that we were brought on to be a think tank, so they didn't have to pay people to come up with these ideas. We're pretty smart. We're pretty good at what we do. But I'm excited. I'm excited about all of this stuff. I also enjoy not only coming at it from the fans' perspective, but also being sort of a mirror for the fans. Sometimes we challenge the fans and the fan base. Being inside the bubble, being outside the bubble, and we have a good time. It's all good. Just strap yourself in.
To be clear, we're not just talking about the things that go on this Movie Talk feed. We're talking about Collider Video and all of its content. We're talking about the podcast network. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about things that have yet to come out, like all the gaming stuff. It's just pretty much all Collider everything for the show. It started out originally a couple years ago as the Schmoes Know recap show. Then we dabbled into some Collider conversation. We realized that we enjoy that probably more.
Well, for a minute, we didn't even know if we were allowed to. And then some things changed.
Yeah.
And it was like, talk about it all you want. So
yeah, and like you said, I think
the leash is off.
The powers that be value our perspective and insight,
allegedly,
and yeah, so we're told. But I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
Yeah, and there are some people they might have been followed us all the way over from After Smoke. Maybe you guys know our history quite a bit. So the main difference is we're not really going to do anything with Schmozo content anymore.
Well, let me pump the brakes on that for a second. Our task is to discuss anything Collider related. So just as a for instance, yeah, if Harloff and Ellis have a conversation about something that happens concerning Collider, of course we're going to talk about it. The basketball game is a huge thing. Christian's carpool, that was where the podcast feed was announced. So of course we're going to talk about things like that, the things that you might have missed.
What a weird place to announce the podcast.
I know. It was a weird time too. It
was odd.
Didn't even know.
Yeah.
Didn't even know if it was time for that. But it is.
He didn't even promote that carpool. It was just put on carpool and then I hop into.
We'll talk about that in a second when we talk about Collider Body Slam, because this kind of came out of nowhere, didn't it?
Right. It sure did.
I like it though.
Yeah, we'll get into that later.
It was a Ryan Snelling move. It made me uncomfortable. When things aren't planned out and they just appear on my podcast feed, I'm like, oh, we're doing this now.
That's a Ryan Snelling move?
Absolutely.
What's an example?
Your movie, what are they called? Your movie commentaries also filling the void for your movie show on Sight and Sound. I didn't know that was a thing. It's whatever. It's cool. Hey, we're playing Fortnite now on Sight and Sound's YouTube channel. All good.
Okay. All right. Well, like I said, some of you might have followed us from After Smo. I need our new listeners to understand something. We are not employees of Collider. We are not Collider shills. Like I said, I think we're fairly reasonable, and I'm going to prove that to you. I'm just going to go on and I'm going to rip the head off the snake right here. And
I don't like snakes.
To prove that I'm not a shill, I'm just going to open up our show.
Thor likes snakes.
Ripping Mark Fernandez, Jay.
Well, it's not a good idea.
No, I want to prove to our audience I am not a shill, okay? Get a load of this guy. Mark Fernandez. He produced Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Let me explain
sounds like
to you.
A good thing to me. What a great game.
The nightmares traveling from island to island, the loading screens.
Did you travel
Jay.
from island to island? I don't think that's how the game went.
Yeah, definitely did. You travel island to island. The loading screens were just awful.
I thought you just stayed in Vice City.
The time wasted on those loading screens. It was terrible. It was the bane of my existence. Do what James Cameron does.
Ago.
Do what George Lucas does. Create the technology so you don't have to do that anymore, okay?
That's enough of this. He's provided us great content on Collider. He provided us what might be, in my opinion, one of if not the best Grand Theft Auto games. So you just watch your devilish tongue before I hit you over the face.
Yeah, I really like that game. The cheat codes.
Good for you. What's going on in the Collider world?
Well, not much, Jay. No, I'm just kidding. I got a quick question before we dive deep.
What?
Ellis brought this up on Harloff and Ellis, and
I thought we weren't talking about that.
I thought it involves something at Collider.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm bringing up two things we don't talk about. We don't talk about Harloff and Ellis, and we don't talk about
it. Before we get messages, we talk about it.
I'm going to talk about something else that we don't talk about, which is the movie Trivia Schmodown.
Right.
There's another show for that.
There's a show for that.
It's time for the movie Trivia Schmodown, or let's get ready to Schmodown.
I've never, ever in my life noticed this to be an issue. It's such a Christian thing to be aware of that. Yeah. That's fine, too. Because, again, another Ryan Snelling thing. That's something that you would be like, this is slightly different from what it normally is. Let's talk about it. And I'm like, no.
Actually,
it's okay.
I think the issue, Christian's issue, is that it's two separate lines.
I'm the Mark in this situation,
it's
typically.
Two separate lines told. No, you're not. We're both Mark in this situation because
okay.
It is two separate lines told at two different times. And I think Christian's issue is you say this line here and then that line here, and Ellis says the line is the same thing. It's the same line. It's redundant. And I was like, yeah, he's absolutely right.
Christian was absent on a couple of the Schmodowns, which I thought was strange.
But he still announces the contestants, so I wonder how that works.
It's like a soundbite?
Is he off to the side? Does he record it later in post? If he does record it later in post, how do they match it up with the actual entrance?
There was a time where it was speculated that he was, even when he wasn't a panelist on Movie Talk, he was still off to the side, like giving little cues. I don't know if we ever got confirmation of that. Also missing on, I don't know if this was in your rundown, but also missing on the Avengers Infinity War scoreboard episode, which I think he was very, very vocal about wanting to be on, having some of his takes. So it's kind of interesting, like when they choose to do that type of stuff. I have no idea. You know, Wendy popped up on it, which is fine, but yet Christian, who is also a full-time person, wasn't on it at all. Maybe he was hungry. Maybe he was getting lunch. I have no idea.
I thought it was interesting it came out that early because we still have 2 weeks. We have 2 weeks before press even sees it. So right. I'm going to forget the predictions, and I might have to go back and watch it because it came out so early.
Let me ask you this question, just because we're talking about this right now specifically. We talked on After Schmo about how important of a time right now is for Collider to be taking advantage of the heavy movie season,
right?
Everything being so clustered together. I look back on something like Star Wars and how pivotal Star Wars was to get their subscriber count up and views and this and that. Do you what is sort of your temperature level on their Avengers content thus far? Obviously, they have a show, much like Star Wars Jedi Council. They have heroes to cover a lot of it and to talk about it. It's a frequent topic on Movie Talk, but have we gotten enough supplemental content outside of that to sort of support the buzz around the movie thus far?
I would like to see, this is something they haven't done. It's not really a criticism. I just think it would be interesting to see. I want to see Schnepp talk what actually happens in the comic book storyline.
Right.
And sort of make parallels into what we've gotten so far in the MCU. Like what is consistent in the MCU that still could happen in the comic book storyline.
Sort of like a Collider crash course that
exactly.
we had. Yeah.
I would like to see a little bit of that because they did some really great, it was actually post Black Panther, I guess, where they sat down and did a lot of examination of the film. So maybe they are planning Avengers Infinity War is going to, after the film, it's going to create so much content, raise so many questions.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So maybe the bulk of that will come after the movie. And like I said, we still have time, but I would like to see Schnepp or somebody sort of draw those parallels and sort of provide, scoreboard is great, but I want to see some educated guesses and some cross-examination as well. But then again, you could just make that an entire episode of Heroes, I guess, if you wanted to do that. But
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I don't get to watch Heroes as much as you do. I usually take in about one episode a week from time to time. I know they're having fantastic conversations on there. They did a whole episode this past week of what do we actually know about the movie, which is cool. And yeah, I think you're right a little bit. Schnepp does a great job on Movie Talk whenever a conversation is brought up. Like they had this whole conversation about Secret Wars. This is something he's been championing a lot lately that I just really didn't have any knowledge of.
Right.
I would love to hear more about that. And yeah, maybe Heroes is the place to do it, but a more truncated sort of episode that's serviceable and shareable to people. But it could also be the perfect thing after the movie comes out. I think you're right.
Here's the reason why I need some kind of supplemental video. 2 pieces of content that have come out this week sort of go against each other a little bit. So a lot of people, again, if you watch Scorecard, a lot of people are speculating. Scoreboard, excuse me, I'm sorry. A lot of people are speculating Thanos will not die. He's still going to be the big bad in Avengers 4. So if Schnepp is predicting a secret invasion movie involving Kree and Skrulls, I want to know if you can still do that when everybody on Scoreboard says Thanos is still going to be in Avengers 4. And I think the Thanos thing is a very well-educated guess. So,
am I forgetting, was Schnepp on that episode? I don't think he was. I think I know that.
No, he was not. He was talking about, well, I mean, he's talked about it on Heroes and Movie Talk. So, tell me how, if you can, tell me how you can have Thanos, but also Secret Invasion. Because, again, I'm not well read in comics, so I don't know if maybe that is an actual story.
And it is an interesting thing to dance around too, to compare and contrast this film with Star Wars: The Last Jedi. We didn't know there wasn't existing content IP out there that people could say, oh, here's what happened here.
Right.
maybe they're being a little bit more conscious about the spoiler type of stuff. Maybe people don't want to have that content because it could potentially spoil things in the movie. So that is smart. I think you're on the right track, though. Content, but it is a fine line to walk. Like, do we want to get those looks right now, or do we want to wait until after the movie? Yeah, that's why they have to make those decisions and not us.
Well, it's interesting because some of their video content is prompted by the .com side of things.
Yeah.
And when you like look into the movie blogging sphere, all those reports that just had no problem revealing to the world that Chris Evans is probably going to die.
Right.
But then again, I mean, they are just taking his word for it. So again, that's not...
They're reporting. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily criticizing it, but I guess my point is if you have a video putting out to the world that Chris Evans, then that sort of gives you permission to continue that kind of behavior. You know what I mean? If it's not a definitive spoiler, but it's, again, I still think it falls under speculation because we don't know that Cap dies. He might continue to be Nomad or pass the shield on. It's like a number of things could happen. It's movie speculation, not necessarily spoiler territory.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about sort of that dynamic of what movie talk represents to different people, or just what it should represent between reporting news and just a show where they react to news almost. Right. It's weird how I get my movie news from Movie Talk first, and then they usually make that content afterwards, that news.
Right.
And it's sort of a more expansive look at it, especially from a more journalistic point of view. Is that a word? Journalistic? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, it is.
Sure,
that's a word, Jay.
Anyways, it's weird how that is, though, because I wonder if some people... I need to check the actual numbers for what the news videos do. Because,
I can look it up.
Because I wonder if sometimes if an audience is getting that information from Movie Talk, they might not be as inclined to watch those news videos once they drop. Or I could be selling the audience short. Maybe they are looking at it the same way that I am, where they know that they're going to get a more official sort of reporting on those news stories.
I'm actually glad you brought up this point, because this is something I could have said at the top of the show. I think you and we both take in Collider content differently. Like I said, we have completely different viewership habits. So I hope that that's something that we represent and comes across, because like you just said,
absolutely,
like you just said, you get your news on the day watching Movie Talk. I probably follow a lot more movie blogs and stuff on Twitter, so I'm watching Movie Talk primarily for their takes on the stories that I already know. And Movie Talk, well, Collider in general, has an audience of both sides of the coin. So I'm glad you really you brought that up.
I'm more from a quote-unquote casual movie fan perspective, obviously, because we do content outside of what we're doing here and following all this stuff with Collider. You're the movie guy, so you're on top of all that stuff. I'm obviously interested in it, but it's important for me to take it all in for this show, but also to be a part of the conversation on Sight and Sound as well.
I would say, depending on the news item, Collider News will get between 5,000 to 20,000 views consistently. So something like, let's see, we had why Jeff Wadlow's X-Force movie didn't happen. That only has like 5,000, right? But should Star Wars continue digitally resurrecting dead actors, it's going to have 11,000.
Of course.
And both of those were put out side by side on the same day.
And it's interesting to look at those two things, because you have something like X-Force that's just in a very early production stage where there is no pre-existing. Obviously, it's a big property. It's a big IP to be a part of the X-Men universe, but because you don't have much to go off of, because people haven't seen this and that, anything Star Wars branded is going to just get those eyes on it as fast as possible.
Absolutely. Do you have anything else on that front?
Not necessarily. I just enjoy it. I like that they're doing these news things, and they do them so often and so frequently. The bromance brewing between Roka and Dorian is just it's magnificent. I like that too. I like that Dorian is I guess he's a full-time employee. I mean, he's on pretty much everything, and not everything. He's on a lot of content, and it's nice to have a new face that's popping up that frequently.
They've already put out 3 today. For those of you who don't know, we record this show on Thursday evenings. That time varies. Right now it's our 6:30. Sometimes we're going to be doing it at 10:30, 11 at night. So sometimes when we record, we haven't taken in everything. Like, I wanted to talk about Now, Later, or Never, but Jedi Council came out an hour later tonight, so I'm assuming that that's just going to push that back. It's going to push back Caption This. Actually, I do want to talk about Now, Later, Never for a second, as much as we can. It might not even be a Thursday show.
Right.
Did they announce?
I don't really understand if it's and this is obviously people will have seen it probably while they're listening to this.
Right.
So we're going to sound a little bit like idiots, but that's fine because it's of no surprise to me.
Yeah, I don't care about sounding like an idiot.
We're just some guys doing a thing. So I don't necessarily understand what that is, if it is supposed to be a show or if it's supposed to be the way it was pitched, or at least my understanding is it's supposed to be a new format for their reviews that will have sort of a show-like twist to it, a little bit of a shtick. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just going to have some sort of fun around it where maybe it's more digestible for people.
It's essentially going to be, it feels like a segment of a talk show, like a 2-minute segment on Extra Entertainment Tonight, but it's its own video.
Right.
So they said it's going to be rapid fire reviews. Now, Later, Never is going to be the rating system, and they're just going to go through what's coming out this weekend. Yeah. A Quiet Place, Now. I almost said Bonkers, but Blockers.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Later, I don't know, and they're just gonna do it rapid fire. Maybe say one or two things about the movie, and then they're out of there. I mean, it could it could be a Facebook, it could be an Instagram upload if it wanted to. It sounds like they are just getting in and getting out of there.
Well, let me ask you this question. So on the Collider town hall, they addressed something that we kind of, I think a lot of people probably saw coming, this whole idea of making more shareable content, more short form content. We're well into them doing that, and I think they're doing a great job at putting together different things that exist. It's just interesting, and you've obviously watched Collider a lot longer than I have, and I know they've dabbled in shorter form videos that have been maybe, is it fair to say, less consistent, or at least maybe had a shorter lifespan or a shorter run. It's weird to take a channel that was known for this long form content, your movie talks, your Jedi Councils, your heroes, etc., TV talk, rest in peace, and flip the script, no pun intended, to having all of those things, but the primary source of their content right now, if you just look en masse, it is this shorter form content. What is sort of your outlook on the shorter form content? Has it been a success thus far? Are they doing a good job? Where do they need to grow?
Well, the first example that came to mind when you said that was Captain Learning.
Okay.
And obviously, I think there are people in that building that
it
are
just
still...
didn't hit, did it?
There are people in that building that are still tremendous fans of that. I know that they were disappointed.
People no longer in that building as well.
By the audience reaction.
Yeah.
I think for the most part. I think Christian's actually been outspoken and been like, look, you all just didn't get that. My issue with Captain Learning is that I have a friend of mine who does well on YouTube who was already doing pretty much that exact idea.
Right.
So to me, it wasn't as interesting. What's funny, it wasn't polarizing for me.
Right.
It was polarizing to everyone else who hadn't been exposed to anything like that. But anyway, to answer your question, Captain Learning was much more of a produced video. I mean, a lot of writing went into it. Something like Caption This, the fans are doing the writing for you.
Right.
And that's sort of the point, is that what's great about these short form shows, Now, Later, Never, and Caption This and whatever may come, we've talked about limiting time and resources. So
absolutely,
if you're going to put things out like this, I don't want to make it sound like I'm asking them to put little effort into it, but it doesn't have to be high concept.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, they used to do news reporting on Collider has always existed. Never with this much sort of, they've never been this prolific about putting out the content like they are. And it's literally them sitting in front of the same set most of the time. I remember back in the day, like, we were wondering if it was like green screen. Remember that? Like, they had some weird, they had a different sort of look to things. And it was just like, I've never seen this set in my life.
it used to be someone standing in, like, I think what used to be
a dark
office.
Yeah.
And it did kind of look fake.
The mailbag office.
It's actually, it's funny because I think with Collider News, the most time spent is probably on the animation. What word was that? The animation. What? The exchange of the text and the graphics. the cutting to all of the
some of the production stuff.
All of the imagery and everything that's flashing throughout that video.
Right.
I think that's probably
stuff you do in post or you're live queuing it up.
I think that's probably what takes the most time. I wonder how much of that is already done. Like obviously a lot of that is already pre-animated, but you still have to exchange out the text and imagery and things like that. So I'd be curious to know how long that takes when it comes to producing those news videos.
We're going to work on getting guests more on this show. Not sure how often it'll be, but that's something I would love to talk to Cody Hall about. Just like his the technical aspects of putting some of that stuff together. What challenges did he see when these new graphics were brought to the table? Obviously, a lot more was asked of him, and people like Adam, I think, is responsible for some of that stuff.
I think Adam switches movie talk, so I think Adam is the one who's dealing with all of that business.
Gotcha.
Collider Movie Talk is very busy nowadays. I think that's Adam. I would like clarification on that. You're right about getting guests. I mean, once we get settled, I want to have Dorian on. I want to have Roca on to find out what he does as a producer. So he already said he was down, so I can't wait to talk to him about that. Ellis, did you hear Ellis throw that shot at him this week?
I didn't.
Ellis asked if Heroes even needed a producer. It was pretty funny. I thought of
It's hard to wrangle John Schnepp, especially when he dips into the Schnepp zone.
Did I say Schnepp or Oh, you meant... No, I'm sorry. You're right. There's too many Johns.
It's true.
Too many Johns and too many Marks. Another thing I wanted to mention real quick, because I definitely want to get into basically the first official week of the podcast network, and there's a lot we can do there. Oh, I'm sorry. My original question for Now, Later, or Never. It's that if someone came to you with that idea, that pitch, do you put that out on a Thursday, knowing that there are movie audiences that go to the theater now on Thursday nights to see these big movies? Do you need to have your movie review show covering the weekend in box office? Does that need to come out on Thursday night, or should it be a Friday show? Because I was just thinking about this. For one, I don't even know if they declared officially what the day is. For whatever reason, I was just expecting it to happen today. Mm-hmm. But part of me was curious. Do you put it out on Thursday so that it's already just out for the entire weekend? The audience, I think the Thursday night audience already knows what they're going to see anyway, because they care that much about it to see it on Thursday night. So I just kind of thought it was an interesting conversation.
Okay, so from my perspective, I know there are a ton of people out there. Listen, there are levels to this game in the movie fandom space, okay? I go to movies. I take in a lot of movie news and content that 99% of people don't give a shit about. They just don't. But there's a ton of people out there who are movie fans that go to the movie every single weekend because there's a movie to go see and they want to have a take on it.
Right.
I get that. That's totally cool. This show, I don't know anything about it. I haven't seen it. It seems to me like this is a show geared towards people who are looking towards reviewers to say, should I go see this movie or not? That I rely heavily on that with the bank of reviewers that I enjoy, the schmoes. Personally, for me, Chris Stuckman. If Collider is going to be that space for people, then it makes sense to put out a video that's quick. I don't know if they're going to cover multiple movies in one
as far as
video.
I know, yeah.
That's rapid fire, that they can share easily on Facebook, share easily on Instagram, and say, watch this, don't watch this, whatever.
That's what's cool about this idea. For one, it reminds me a lot of one of my favorite movie talk discussions we've ever had. I remember raving to you how much I enjoyed this episode. I told Ellis, do you remember Do you remember their conversation about Rotten Tomatoes? Rotten Tomatoes introducing their own show just like this.
Heavy debate on the show, for sure.
Heavy debate. And it was awesome. We talked about how much we really valued that kind of discussion on Movie Talk. It's interesting that they're doing this consistently, whereas Rotten Tomatoes does not. And it's not a new idea, but they're also very aware of that. That doesn't matter, because you're going to hear me say...
They also don't have the... I'm about to say this, and I don't mean it in a negative way towards Rotten Tomatoes. They don't have the stink of what Rotten Tomatoes represents, and what I mean by that is Rotten Tomatoes is supposed to be this review aggregator. It seems kind of weird for them to be doing... It's like too meta, I feel like. Collider is known for covering movies.
Right.
You know, it makes more sense to me. I take that back. It makes sense for Collider to do this. Not that it doesn't make sense for Rotten Tomatoes to do it, but from a fan's perspective, it's probably easier to digest. from a Collider perspective.
And there's also just an understanding that this movie space is so saturated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you're going to hear me say it a lot. The movie space, movie coverage space is saturated, and movie blogging as we know it is dead.
Yeah.
So it's
if you're on Twitter, you have as much power as other people out there who have.
Right.
I could say names, but I'm not going to. Oh, what's that? You heard something about Moon Knight being in Punisher? If you say it, then it's congratulations. You're a movie reporter.
That is easily our favorite example.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to snap dropping.
Somebody who is too touchy about what I just said is going to comment and say, they do a lot of hard work. I know they do a lot of hard work. Guess what? Podcasting is hard work too. It's fine. If you're on Twitter and you've got to take on movies, you have just as much of a right to be a content creator. That
would be a great
welcome to 2018.
Great conversation to have with Frosty. Like,
absolutely.
If we could get a hold of Frosty, I would ask him,
yes.
How are you evolving? I know how Collider's evolving, but what is it like for you to kind of see this going down? Because maybe he's not committing this crime, but a lot of film blogging in general, all of the news is just the headline. The news is the news is the same amount of information as a tweet. Yet, and that's what's challenging film blogging.
But yet
right
we
now.
put certain people up on a pedestal. So let me give you this from my perspective, somebody who came into this more recent and had to look at all these individuals and basically assess my level of trust with them. Okay. It took me all of maybe 2 appearances by Frosty to know that this guy knows his shit. He has a lot of respect for journalism, I feel like, and he has a lot of integrity, and he values his own.
He's passionate about being a truth teller.
Yeah, for sure. And even when he does report it, the way he speaks, the things that he says, his verbiage that he uses, it's so careful. Like, he's like, I can't confirm this specifically, but it is said. Like, just using words like that, making sure that you are creating the most foolproof, potential bulletproof, and just respectable view for your audience. We can't let that go unnoticed. It's so important. It's important to give those takes and make sure that your audience can trust you.
Absolutely.
And he does a great job of it.
And yeah, so anyway, Now, Later, or Never, to close this book, it's funny how it's sort of a combination of that Rotten Tomatoes thing, but it's also them bringing back what Coming This Week was all about on Movie Talk when they used to do that every Tuesday and Thursday. They'd look at one film on Tuesday, one film on Thursday.
Yeah, R.I.P. all the old Movie Talk segments that used to exist.
Is TV Talk resting in peace, by the way? I don't think it is.
I don't know. We haven't been approached about hosting it yet, so I have no idea.
That's true. We're available. The last the last thing I want to get to before we talk about the podcast network, this past Monday was Robert Meyer Burnett's 3rd anniversary on Collider Heroes, and I bring this up for one.
Did they let him out of jail?
Yeah,
to be on the show. Okay, good.
Yeah, I just want to say that we're big fans of Robert Meyer Burnett on this show. He is arguably my favorite pundit on Collider.
He's a character, and I feel like he doesn't try to be, but I love him for that.
Yeah, you can't make that kind of guy up.
You really can't.
Same with Schnepp. I mean, that's why I can't miss an episode of Heroes, because when they're on together, I think
Movie Talk is in our rundown, right? We haven't skipped over it yet, have we?
Movie Talk is not in the rundown.
Okay, well, if it's not, then let me just tag this on real quick. Movie Talk. How dare you for not putting this in? Because I have been a champion over the last few weeks, at least on After Schmo, about how many people were at the table. I've been very outspoken personally, and obviously this is a subjective thing, that I'm not a huge fan personally of a 4-person table. I think the conversation gets a little bit rigid, and it takes a little too long to come back around to certain people. This week, because obviously we have a lot of pull, and I pay attention to this, they have 3 people on the table the entire week. Did you notice this? Did you pick up on it?
If they got that from you, I'm very, very disappointed in them because, for
the record, I don't think they took it into consideration at all. But I can dream. Or maybe they did. It doesn't matter. I thought it was great. I thought the conversations were a lot more fluid. I think I don't know if this is a temporary thing or it's on an as-needed basis. It just felt a little bit more intimate. It felt more conversational. Like it wasn't just, here's my take for 20 seconds. Let me throw it to somebody else. What you picked up on it, that it existed.
Oh, absolutely.
What was your reaction to watching it?
I'm still of the mindset that you can have a great show or a bad show either way.
Absolutely.
Depending on the pundit and the group of people at the table.
Well, Mark makes it so effortless regardless.
I was going to say, if it's an Ellis, Christian, and Schnepp, then obviously I'm all for that threesome. But there's also a lot of foursomes that I love just as much as that. And like, for example, today it was Ellis, T, and,
you like a foursome?
And Damien. And I didn't respond to that. And like for today's episode, I wish that there could have been a fourth person to do that show.
There's some epic combinations. Like I think
there are some good ones.
Even though Schnepp, Christian, and Ellis are three white males sitting at a table, and maybe not the most interesting of perspectives in terms of the diversity.
I mean, they're very dim, those three.
No. Well, you guys know what I mean by that. Like, it's great to get a female's take on certain things.
T was hilarious today.
T was fantastic today. I still love her perspective because she comes at it from a perspective that isn't necessarily common in Collider. We get a lot of common thought on things. Obviously, everybody has different opinions, but for the grand scheme of things, everybody kind of falls in a similar thinking, where she's very against the grain on comic book films and Star Wars, and it's not easy for people to take in who are big fans of those things. But we need that conversation.
Exactly.
A Schnepp, Christian, and Ellis table has all of my favorite things in it because it just has so much likeliness to go off the rails at any point in time. In fact, we got that this week.
Right.
I don't remember specifically what it was, but they were just like locked onto some joke. We got a Tony Ravioli bit towards the end.
God, I love it.
I can't tell if Ellis hates it.
Oh, I think he does.
I love that he hates it.
I love it.
It makes me so happy.
That's one of my favorite things that Christian and Schnepp do. That's why I love it so much. I love it. And what's interesting about T, too, is we talked about T's role and how she can feel out of place or be the most valuable player when it comes to an episode all about Marvel, the
I think
MCU.
she can hold her own in any conversation.
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, she's very talented. I'm not saying she's
funny.
not talented. What's great about her, though, because we have all of these other people coming in here that are so geeked out, like a Jenna Bush, who's really impressed me. Kia, too.
Knowledgeable,
like, all of these people are coming in, and they're Danny Fernandez. They're all so smart about the comic book stuff and the Star Wars stuff, and have
experts
T come
in certain
and T coming in. She
reminds me more of like a Clark Wolf, where she just has this really overwhelming knowledge of movies, period, especially from like you'll often hear T have discussions about the production side of things and screenwriters and this and that. She has really good takes on those.
And Haley Fouch also plays a similar Clark Wolf role. I mean, they're very into genre as well, and it's not just about the big, flashy.
Think we'll see as much Clark now that she's got some new gig?
I don't know, but I do want to wish her a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Clark.
Today's her birthday. I was super happy. You told me about that announcement. Super happy. She's working over at Fandom. I didn't know a whole lot about that company. I don't host an after show for Fandom, but super excited for her. If it means less on Movie Talk, then that sucks. But we have Sending the Wolf, which I've been enjoying lately, so it's all good. I'm just happy for her. So
a lot of those people that do work that are freelancers and this and that, they get a job that's a little bit more, takes a little bit more of their time. We often see them still pop up on things like Schmodown, and of course, Clark Wolf is going to have a place in the Schmodown, considering how pivotal of an individual she is to all of that. More on that on the other show.
You want to know why I left Movie Talk out of the rundown?
What is that?
Because the only things that I had on it this week were nitpicky, and I didn't want to start. I didn't want to start afterthoughts with nitpicky arguments.
That's why you got me. Sometimes I pick up on things.
Yeah, I'm still not gonna do it. But anyway, let's get to this whole podcast network thing. So last week,
let's talk about it.
Last week, if you go to SK Plus or the Schmoes Know podcast feed, Jay and I pretty much dedicated most of our last episode explaining the podcast network. So if you need to, go check that out. We might do a little bit of that here as well. But it's the first official week of the podcast network content. Right. And I just kind of wanted to go into it. What I think
seems like a massive hit. Let me just say that. I keep my ear to the ground.
I know you do.
And also don't like living in the past. But I want to think back about some of my things that I witnessed across multiple fan platforms, paying attention to Twitter and this and that. People, I was always a little bit skeptical and a little bit worried about these things taking off onto other feeds. But I've seen so many people just championing this idea. Like, thank you for giving me an avenue for my favorite shows. And people, we've talked about this before, but I think sometimes we even still do take it a little bit for granted just how valuable listening to this long form content is as opposed to watching it. Yes, there is a whole other audience out there that will benefit from listening to it. And I guess I want to congratulate everybody because it seems like it's been a massive, massive hit.
What's funny about it is I'm someone who had no issue with the original Collide. I mean, for sure, you and I were talking about the podcast network, but as far as you and I just listen to podcasts all the time. So
I like to watch Movie Talk while I eat my lunch at work.
The idea of following the original Collider feed was never an issue, even though there are multiple shows.
We're also familiar with stuff like that. We follow other
that's
podcasts
how
like that.
Our podcast feed operates, and Schmoes know when we were there as well. So we're not foreign to that idea. But again, there is tremendous value of separating them. So my point is, it's funny that I never had an issue with that original feed, yet I've taken advantage of this podcast. It's funny how that worked out. Like
having separate artwork has been like easy for me to navigate through the episodes, like sort of how I position them in terms of what I'm interested in listening to and what I'm not.
Yeah, it's funny how the creation of this podcast network, I've just utilized it a lot more. It's funny how long form content can be a time saver sometimes because I don't have to come home and worry about sitting down watching this stuff because I've already listened to it at work or something like that. So it's funny how that works out. So I've definitely been having fun enjoying the podcast content that way. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a success. I think it's pretty much firing on all cylinders for the most part. I think people are still confused by this. There are people, I saw it in the Harloff carpool that he did. There are still people asking a lot of questions and concerns about the podcasting app. And maybe if you're listening to Jay and I do this right now, you've got it figured out. So maybe you don't need to hear this, but I didn't realize how many people... We've talked a lot about going back to sort of the different types of audiences that Collider has.
Right.
We've wondered before, is there a group of fans that don't take in any other content but Collider? So to that person, this podcast network, it's a completely new thing to them. And that's something that we have to realize is that, we take in things like The Ringer and we create our own content. So we're always exploring these kinds of ideas, but that's not everybody.
Right.
So Christian is pushing for Android users. He's pushing the Podcast One app. I don't think that would be my suggestion per se.
Right. I mean, you understand why he's doing it.
I understand why he's doing it. Absolutely. Because they're working together. But I think, if someone was to, the person that only takes in Collider content, yes, listen to Podcast One. But if you're going to Podcast One and you're an avid podcast listener, that's not what I would recommend because Podcast One's app is only Podcast One branded shows. So if you wanted to listen to Nerdist or anything like that, you're not going to get that on Podcast One. So that's not my go-to when I recommend that. But there are so many podcast apps for the Android user that you'll find one.
Let's talk about Podcast One for a second as well. I wasn't super familiar with them just in general, even before taking in Schmo's content.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating to me that they are sort of viewed as a podcast network themselves, like a bigger umbrella for a bunch of podcasts, almost like an MCN, I guess, like a multi-channel network for YouTube. But I wasn't aware, and I was glad to hear it from Christian's Carpool, that not only are they doing all of this stuff and sort of shepherding along packaging the content to distribute out to other platforms, iTunes and this and that.
Right.
But they also have a vested interest in making sure that it succeeds, hearing that Christian's one-on-one show is being helped along by Podcast One reaching out to people that they know, connections, to bring guests on to the show.
It's funny because we're sort of discovering how that all worked out.
Right.
I was curious what that meeting was like when he went in there and pitched it. By the way, the app thing, that's not a criticism, but that's just what I would recommend. But I think my only concern, and maybe it's not a concern at all, my only downside to the Podcast One thing is that the authorship of the Collider Podcast Network, I had always imagined the authorship just saying Collider.
Right.
Because you don't necessarily know that it's a podcast network unless Collider shows you that graphic of all 6 thumbnails. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If there was an authorship, right now the authorship is Podcast One. So if I wanted to search Collider, I might not necessarily get One-on-One and Schmodown.
I haven't dug deep into like the episode descriptions to see if they're cross-linking everything. Maybe I should do that for next week's episode for sure. But I mean,
it also might depend on where you search.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
iTunes, we use Pocket Cast. Pocket Cast might not recognize it when iTunes
does. I learned when this all came about to just search Collider, period, because everything is branded Collider Movie Talk, Collider Jedi Council, Collider Heroes.
Yeah, but One-on-One and
exactly.
Schmodown are not.
Exactly. So that's where it sort of gets a little bit twisted.
Right. There might not be any way around that too.
Yeah,
with
and
Podcast
listen,
One.
obviously we're talking like I know how to find them. I'm sure a lot of people know how to find them.
Right.
But not everybody knows how to find them. So we're sort of, but I also have to give a lot of credit. I think so far, and Christian has been the one spearheading it, he has done an incredible job at just making it as accessible as possible and doing all the cross promotion for everything.
The .com also posted an article all about it. Their readers have their own audience as well. Collider.com podcast.
Yeah.
As a reason to promote.
I think Collider Video and Collider Twitter both retweeted that our show was coming out today, which was really, really nice. And it's good to see that. Hopefully it continues throughout the rest of the channel. Let's talk a little bit about one-on-one for a second.
Absolutely.
This is a show I was very, very curious to see how it did, because for me personally, my background with podcasting, my favorite podcast of all time has been Joe Rogan for a really, really, really long time, and I like longer form conversations, and it's something that one-on-one, I guess pun intended, there wasn't a lot of stuff like this that existed in association with Collider, and I didn't know how it was going to work. I didn't know not necessarily how it was going to work. I didn't know how it was going to come across. Not in the content. I knew the content was going to be good, but how it was going to be received. First of all, from a content perspective, love the conversation. I can tell you so many times I've paid attention to podcasts where I didn't know anything about the guests and walked away falling in love with that person, just like being enamored by everything they were doing.
You and I are no strangers to that idea at all. Absolutely.
Yeah, just diving in. And the goal of a show like that, it's not the guest, right? The guest's sole purpose there is to be a part of the discussion, also to bring in new guests. The goal and the sell, the pitch, I guess, you want people to fall in love with the show, the host of the show, Christian in this regard, and say, I like Joe Rogan's podcast because he has great conversations with people. That's what Christian needs to do to win people over. I don't care who's on. I just want to hear this podcast every single week. I'm glad to report, to me personally, the show was a hit. I don't know. I don't even know the podcast numbers from the feed, and it's probably none of my business, but just by the YouTube videos alone, which is fascinating that it was distributed on Collider proper, the views broke 20,000 over the weekend, which by the standard that we've been given, that a 20,000 benchmark is sort of what they were going for the top 50 superheroes. It's a huge success for something that's never been done before on this channel. For obviously, Dan Fogel is a big guest in this and that, but he's probably not the biggest guest that they could have gotten. I mean, if they really wanted to crush it, obviously they could have gotten some huge, crazy, gigantic
Russo brothers.
name. Yeah, but I mean, it just was a success. Christian was sort of playing coy, in my opinion, in Carpool. I don't agree with him, man. Like him saying stuff like, "Oh, people could have thought it was a news thing, and they probably clicked off."
He said that?
He did, and I'm on a different page, man. I don't buy into that. Obviously, he could probably show me numbers of like duration of people watching it. 21,000 plays is not a mistake. Not only that, the thumbnail looks nothing like a news story. It also wasn't titled like a news story.
It's got an actor's face on it, but it also has his name plastered all over it. I mean, it doesn't appear that way at all.
It's
cool. Also 50 minutes long.
Yeah, if he was just trying to, play it cool and like, my show, it did fine. I get that, but give yourself some more credit because it was a success.
It's also the first episode.
And a gigantic risk, right? I mean, there's...
Yeah. It was also, this isn't a dig, it just also wasn't promoted as, it didn't have a long promotional run either.
Right.
You know what I mean? For that to just drop on Collider like that.
It's the only show that exists upon the first batch of shows, besides, I guess, ours. We have the Movie Talk feed to sort of help us along. Shows like Body Slam and this and that have the Collider feed to boost them along. It was on its own on an island, and it fucking worked.
We started this conversation talking about people still figuring out the podcast network. I think you can give yourself a little leeway when it comes to the very first episode of that podcast.
Absolutely.
I know that
it'll be interesting to see what the next episode's like for sure. And that's
Clancy Brown. Yeah.
And that's
more recognizable face.
That's something that lost Clancy Brown. That's something we need to address too. So One-on-One comes out every single Friday where we record on Thursday. We're always going to be talking about a week late. You guys will have already watched this by the time, or watched One-on-One by the time you probably hear this. But I think it was a success. We'll pay attention to the numbers. We'll see what it does next week.
Man, Friday is stacked. You got our show. You got the Schmodown. You got One-on-One.
Let's talk about Friday for a second. I actually meant to bring this up during the movie talk thing. Fridays is a weird day for movies, I feel like, because I don't know. I need to pay attention to Friday numbers on Collider across the board, because this is a day when people go to the movies, right? And they're talking about the movies they saw. Is it a big day for news? Is it a big day for Collider on Friday?
I don't think there's any way you can determine what's a big day for news. Like maybe Monday always hits hard
not for news, but for people tuning in. For people on Friday, if you're just wanting to go to the movie or you're just wanting to talk about the movie you saw, obviously content centered around talking about the movie you saw is going to be great. But I don't know. I would love to see what the trend is on a Friday for Collider.
Probably since you and I have been hosting after Schmo, I was more receptive to the Friday movie talk. Any earlier than that, it felt like
it's the one day a week that I typically don't watch. Not because of anything other than Fridays for me are very, very difficult, where I take in music content, this and that.
There was just a feeling that I had at the time where, like, for example, I listen to Dan Le Batard every single day.
Right.
When him and Stu Gatz aren't there and it's two hosts filling in, it's not the same. I don't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
And there was something about it, a previous iteration of the Friday Movie Talk, that felt like that to me. But I have been more receptive to it. I just don't know. I don't know if I share that same viewpoint. I mean, I think you are concerned enough to bring it up. It sounds like
it's just an interesting thought that went through my head. I take in legitimately between 6 to 7 hours of brand new music on Fridays to do a music show. So it's hard for me to like, hey, what are Roca, Dennis, and Perry talking about on Movie Talk?
Yeah. I don't know. We could take a look at it and see if there's anything. I haven't really.
It'd be great if somebody could provide us that information.
That's the benefit of doing this show now that we're on Collider.
You can reach out to people. We're more official.
We will have scoops out the ass in the way that After Schmo didn't. And as a matter of fact, I got a scoop from Copster. I asked him a question. Hey, can you tell me a little bit about this? Get ready, guys. I'm ready to drop this for you. Copster revealed to the world. If you were still just doing After Schmo, I could probably tell you. But now that you're doing Afterthoughts, no.
What was this in context to? What did you even say? The question that you asked him?
I can't say.
You asked him for insight on something in Collider.
I asked him why he was in San Francisco.
And he withheld the information.
Because I host Collider Afterthoughts.
Right. Interesting.
Does that that feels backwards to me?
I get it. I get it in a weird way.
I mean, I get it if it's just this one specific thing he can't tell me, but across the board, if that's the reasoning across the board for not getting scoops,
it's not like we have this reputation of being like, oh, these guys are leaking secrets.
I mean, maybe he saw Han Solo.
What?
Maybe he went to Lucasfilm to see Han Solo.
Oh, okay.
He went to Lucasfilm.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, because him and Frank were taking shots of the Yoda statue out front.
Oh, is that them? They did that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Why did they send them? Don't mean that negatively.
But I
them?
mean, they're doing
those guys.
I mean, Fernandez is pulling some baller moves though. Him and Perry and Dennis, they just went to Israel.
I know.
Cobster and Frank, they go to San Francisco.
Shout out to our Israel listener.
The equivalent,
the
right?
one that I know of. Yeah,
they're the same thing. Them going to Israel and Cobster going to San Francisco.
No, that's not the case.
Collider Factory. So this is a really cool idea that we also had. We got Body Slam.
We did.
That's interesting because I like that because when they threw out, hey, we're going to recap WrestleMania, I thought the title of the show would literally be WrestleMania Recap with so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. The promise in the artwork that Brian Ward did. I mean,
was there artwork?
There was a Collider Body Slam artwork done. So
here's the thing.
I think that they like this, and we're going to get...
Of course they like it.
I'm not saying it's going to be weekly. I'm saying we're going to get Body Slam sprinkled throughout the year. It's not just going to be a one-off thing. So that's pretty cool.
So one thing that's interesting about this whole thing, so I don't know if every podcast app is like this, but if you have one feed that has multiple shows, you typically don't get individual artwork for the episode. Some do and some don't. So I haven't seen this artwork. This seemed to be a massive hit, right? And so the movie bubble is something that I was sort of shoved into, which is cool. It's great. Met some dope people. But in a weird way, I also got, by being in the movie bubble, I also strangely became in the pro wrestling bubble. There are so many people I follow on Twitter who are cross-pollinated from this movie space, this Collider space, that are obsessed with wrestling, and I didn't choose that. I don't have a problem with it. It's just it's something that I don't have a fandom for.
Right.
And I'm enamored by it. I'm fascinated by it. But of course this was a hit. Of course people wanted this. I listened to the show probably about 20 minutes because obviously it's not a show for me. It's a deep dive show.
Right.
Wanted to get the temperature of it. Of the show, one of the things that I love the most about it is how amazing Aaron Turner did on that show. Literally commanding the show with his knowledge. Obviously, Roca stays up to date with things. Christian from a completely different perspective, which I really, really appreciate from an insider having worked for WWE and sort of having this, watching the big shows. Aaron Turner being...
He showed up.
Oh, my God. He was an absolute master at just being an expert for all of these things. It was really cool. I love the conversation. I love that it was literally just people reacting to what they watched.
It was cool.
Immediately after. It was great. And I hope that it takes off. Seems to me, people were asking, like, is this going to be a thing? Christian seemed to reiterate what he said with any show on the factory. We'll see how it does across multiple episodes. If it prompts us going to another feed, then we'll do it.
It was funny to see a show like a Body Slam, which to me, it feels like that's such an obvious show to go out. I mean, the issue is if it's going to be Christian hosting it, he's got a full plate. So that's why he's being particular. That's why he's being particular about it. He might give it to somebody else.
I was about to say, should he relinquish some? I mean, I think it should be Aaron's show. I think it could easily be Aaron's show. Hook you up with some good microphone situation.
That was another thing I wanted to bring up.
And you can bring a rotating cast of characters, individuals. Maybe bring some new people on that we haven't heard from that are great in this space. I know Brad from Schmodown Rundown could talk about it as well.
I'd be curious to see if he gives that show to those guys. I just thought it was a funny pairing that the first 2 episodes on Factory were those two, because again, I don't know if he said it on Carpool or not, but he did hesitate when it came to just making Body Slam a show.
Right.
It was funny because I don't know what the numbers would have to be for them to think this is a success. So it's funny.
It's also more difficult to gauge via the podcast feed. This isn't YouTube. We can't just pull up the numbers.
I know.
Like that.
And the reason why it was such an interesting pairing is because the Collider.com podcast is a podcast they pulled that already had its own feed.
I was about to say.
Then they said, but the show became bigger because it went to Factory, from what I know. But it's like, okay, so how big does Factory isn't Factory automatically ready to become its own feed again? Like, what do the numbers have to be, and how do those two shows, how does success factor into those 2 different types of shows? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be honest about it. You have to build in potential inflated numbers for the sole fact that if people are there, I mean, our show could have inflated numbers, right? Because if people are getting automatic downloads for Movie Talk, yes, our numbers are probably going to be a little bit inflated potentially. Any show on the Factory could have that potential. You're not really going to learn. You can get a very, very, very slight indication when you put it on YouTube, sort of. The best indication is going to be by how much people are talking about it on social media, really. I mean, and it's still not a good enough pool to pull from. That's why podcasting is so weird in terms of data and statistics. It's very, very difficult.
And obviously there's only 1 episode per show right now, so there's no way there's no trends yet.
Yeah, for sure.
We can't see trends, but I'm just curious because, like I said, Factory is Collider.com a podcast that it's always only going to be a Factory show, I'm wondering, because by design
definitely has its own unique voice.
Right. I wonder if that one is an exception to the rule, whereas Body Slam, they're probably looking for that to be its own show because they see a huge market with wrestling coverage, at least within their own fandom. So I don't know. I wonder what's successful when it comes to Body Slam versus what's successful for .com. I don't know. Maybe they have no plans of taking .com back off.
Well, I also find it interesting. We touched on this a little bit on After Schmo, but it is kind of funny that all of this stuff, the first standalone show outside of Factory, the first new show on Factory was all spearheaded by Christian. I like that he's taking the bull by the horns. I don't even like bulls. They're scary, but when are other people going to get their shows? Like who else in that studio is going to pitch shows?
I talked to RB3 yesterday because we were talking about Legion, and I asked him, is there any talk of bringing the meaning of podcast to the Factory? And he's like, no, I haven't really talked to anybody about it. I was like, just ask.
Yeah.
Because they are looking for content creators for that reason. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. It can't be all
got 3
Christian.
pitches.
Top 10.
4 pitches.
Why wasn't top 10 in that original announcement? Because
I was curious about myself.
Roca and Nost are interested in that. It has its own Patreon. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they said
they
no.
also blew the numbers away on. They had by far the highest numbers on SK Plus.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they did ask, but we didn't get any word of that. But maybe they did ask, and they just said, no, it's our thing. We want to keep it our thing. But then again, I guess another separate question that I would have for Roca and Nost is, why in the world is the top 10 not its own podcast?
I think, too, there has to be a conversation right now specific. And I'm sort of going back on my original statement. We know that it seems like Collider is outfitting their back office staff right now. So I mean, at least that's my sort of take on things. But right now, the only people, if they're not going to seek out new hosts potentially or seek out freelance hosts and this and that they sort of have to rely on their own people in-house. A lot of them are pretty busy. I look at somebody like a Mark Riley maybe that could, I mean, I'm sure he's busy too, but yeah, Mark Riley coming in and bringing back Nightmares or something like that, or just doing some sort of new show, whatever the case may be.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Do you have anything else on the podcast network?
I don't think so. I'm excited. It's always exciting to pay attention to this space because it's so new.
Right.
I love. It's hard to gauge what is coming down the pipe for video stuff because we didn't know what caption this was going to be. We didn't know if it was going to be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. So it's interesting that the podcast stuff has to have so much more of an idea behind it in order to sustain it, obviously, because it's long form conversation. I think it's just exciting to have your finger on the pulse of the podcast feed.
If you have not already, it is crucial. It is very important that you go on iTunes. If you have an iPhone, it is easier than ever to rate and review these podcasts. It is crucial to the development of this network. It optimizes their search so that other people that are brand new to this space can find it. Please, if you have an iPhone or if you have iTunes, go in and rate and review all of these podcasts, whether you listen or not. It would help them out tremendously.
It was when this first came up, I remember I was so excited about it. I went and rated and reviewed all of them like immediately.
Yes.
Searched them, did the comments. I think I'm like the first comment on every new podcast feed. Do you remember where you sort of ended up on the comment section of each of those?
No.
Why? Obviously you're probably not going to know your number, but were you pretty like one of the first at least?
I haven't done it yet.
You haven't done it at all.
I haven't done it yet.
How can we expect to trust you like we trust Stephen Frosty Weintraub with your integrity? You're supposed to be the podcast expert. You're supposed to be the guy that Christian retweets and tells people to ask those guys about podcast stuff. And you haven't even rated and fucking reviewed it yet?
Jay, I am the voice of a particular section of the fandom. I'm the voice of the people that have not...
douchebags. Speaking of which, one thing that was thrown out there that is just literally dangling for anybody to take. Did you hear T drop on Movie Talk today what could be one of the best free agent podcast names or YouTube channel names?
It exists.
Does it? Movie Douches?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the fantasy league.
No.
I was going to say that whole company's a thing. I was surprised Ellis had never heard of it, actually.
She said, yeah, I'm a movie douche. And I was like, that would be a great name for a podcast or a YouTube channel. Yeah. Band name took it.
It's... Okay.
What's up, guys? We're Movie Douche.
Oh, God. I don't know if I could do it. Actually, that reminds me of another channel in this space. Anyway... I think that about does it. You're about to
Movie Douche.
So I'm toying with this idea. I want to do like at the end of every show, I want to do like this week's homework for Collider. Like, I for one, I want to see if they're listening, but I also think it would be funny if they actually did some of this stuff. I was thinking about we talked about it last week on After Show, how Collider Afterthoughts is now going to force people that don't know who we are to learn who we are and what this show is all about.
Right.
I thought it would be hilarious if this week Ellis pitches the plug for Afterthoughts to somebody who has no idea who we are and see...
Like Cobster.
Right. I would love to see him throw it to Perry or Dennis or Schnepp.
Frank.
Right. Pull Frank out of the closet that he's working in. Get him to plug...
Robert Meyer Burnett.
That'd be a dream come true, actually. In all seriousness.
Coy Jandrew.
No, let's see.
This name.
This is yeah.
Still a person.
This is Collider's homework for the week. I just want, whenever you plug Afterthoughts, I don't want Ellis to do it. I want him to force someone who has no idea who we are to plug our show and see if they can even name the host of it.
Michael Rappaport.
Oh man, how do you feel about that? The premiere, the pilot of Collider Afterthoughts.
Yeah, it felt the same that we've always
done. It kind
of
of did.
It's always what it was going to be, wasn't it?
Yeah, but we had to approach it as if it was brand new because people...
Yeah.
Because right now there's someone thinking, I don't think this show's for me.
So we're towards the end. Absolutely. I remember back in the day. You know what's still funny?
That's all these guys are doing?
It's funny that... So this is like the section of the podcast where I feel like Christian has let us... We can do whatever we want.
Oh, we can do whatever we want all the time.
Listen, I love getting these comments from time to time on something like Sight and Sound, or even after Schmo when we were doing it. Something that we've been doing for a while, when they're just like, man, you guys are kind of boring. It's like, okay, it's obviously not for you. So we'll see you later, movie douche.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we have this balance of informing Collider what the fans are thinking, but it's also somehow an interesting show for fans to listen to gain a little bit of perspective. There's like a nice balance, and obviously there are people that are like, I don't need this, and there are shows that exist for me where I'm like, I don't need this,
guys.
But
I not troll, but I go through the comments all the time and read them for different things.
Yeah.
And I listen, when some drama goes down, this is going to be the show for you.
I was going to say.
There is, not that we're like looking for drama, but obviously if something's going on, we're going to talk about it.
But we're also
Our biggest shows of all time have been like, when Campia left? Or for the 50th time.
I was going to say, we're also not always conflict resolution. Like, we love our drama. There are some times, like the whole doom and gloom and all that change stuff, we were kind of
literally were attacking the fan base.
We sort of did that conflict resolution, but there are times when juicy stuff happens and we just eat it up, man.
Well, I mean, we look at it from a strange perspective, but I don't think it's a lone perspective. There's a lot of people that talk about like, I don't like how they're doing this, or I really enjoy this, or I'm wondering how they're going to do this. And that's the stuff that we think about. So I think there's an audience for it.
Yeah, I don't know if whether you know it or not. I'm addressing the listeners now.
Okay.
Jay and I were doing this off air anyway. So that's why this show works.
We don't have lives.
Right. We just talk about
I'm in a healthy relationship though. She accepts that I talk about Collider nonstop. In fact, I was watching Carpool and she was sitting over there and she goes, he's gonna wreck. Is he doing an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression?
Oh. When was Carpool on when you were with Kayla?
It was on in the afternoon.
Oh, that afternoon one on his way home?
Yeah. And she was off work. So,
right.
Anyways, is it time to plug things now?
Yeah. There's another thing we should talk about here, and that's Sight and Sound. Because
that's what I was
people are going to hear us talk about Sight and Sound quite a bit. That's what Jay and I do.
How are we getting paid? We're promoting Sight and Sound at the end of every podcast.
Right. So if you want to go,
that Jay guy, he's not a good guy. All he wants to do is promote Sight and Sound.
Well, yeah.
Somebody said that.
Did someone said that?
Yes, you know who this is.
I really don't. We'll talk about it off air.
Okay.
Yeah, Sight and Sound is what Jay and I do when we're not talking about Collider. It's our podcast. It's our brand. It's our YouTube channel. It's our Twitch channel. No. We're talking about music, movies, and TV. We sort of do a little bit of everything. I do movie commentary sometimes. You do your Friday music show talking about releases and sound off on latest topics.
A lot of music people don't care about.
We do TV recaps. We're talking about...
It's been called the Movie Talk of Music. Sorry, go ahead.
We just finished recapping Counterpart, and right now we're talking about Legion. I just put up the episode 2 recap. RB3 was a guest on that, so...
Filling in for ya boy.
Yeah, there are links to everything Sight and Sound in the description below, so if you want to support Jay and I outside of this show, please, you're welcome to do that. And that's all I got, really.
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jaye Williams, J to the A to the Y to the E. It's the same for both every Friday, like Ryan said. I almost forgot your name for a second because I have CT. Sorry.
How you doing?
Every single Friday doing my music show solo, our YouTube channel full of lots of good stuff, a lot of music reviews, a lot of movie stuff from time to time as well. Just real quick before I throw it to you for your plugs, I do want to mention one thing. We are not on video right now, obviously. The only thing on the Movie Talk feed that's not on video. Video is something that obviously, of course, it's something we want to do in the future. Right now, we're as independent DIY punk rock as it could possibly be. It's just not in the cards right now. It's not conducive to our schedule at this point. In the future, you will have an opportunity, should you choose. We're about to launch a Patreon in the next few months, and a part of that is to get equipment and obviously just get the time to do everything that we do, Sight and Sound, Collider Afterthoughts, etc., via video. So if you want to see stuff on video, it could be in the future, just not right now, but we appreciate you listening nonetheless.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WhatUpSnell. That's where I ramble about movies and 1997 WWE Raw. Thanks so much, guys, for checking out this first episode of Collider Afterthoughts. 1 is in the books, and yeah, we'll see you next week, hopefully. Next Friday.
Mark, pick up your iced teacups. Goodbye.